Number 10. Abandoned car. A desert park ranger on Reddit shared a few of their stories that they had experienced while working. One that stands out is their discovery of a burned and abandoned car. When they received the report, they weren't too shocked, as it wasn't a rare occurrence that cars would be stolen and abandoned, occasionally being burned. When they found the vehicle, and as they waited for the fire department to arrive, they were left standing in shock, as it was clear that there was a body left in the front seat of the car. They discovered rope and other strange items in the car, and it was determined that the body had been tied up and killed. The police arrived, but no answers ever came about what had happened there, and they now refer to the area as the haunted site.
In our number 9 spot today, we have a men's shoe. This artifact is one of the rarest to be shown of the items that have been recovered from the Titanic wreckage because of the fact that it is in such poor condition. All that remains of the shoe are the welt, top cap, and just a touch of the insole. This artifact does a couple things. It reminds you of the very real humans who became victims of this tragedy, and it also reminds you of the unrelenting nature of the ocean. Seeing the personal belongings of the passengers, regardless of knowing who specifically the shoe belonged to in their story, just adds a personal element, like you almost knew them. And then seeing how torn up the shoe has become is a strong reminder to us all that we truly are no match for Mother Nature, and the ocean is one of the most powerful and frightening things on the earth. In our number 8 spot today, we have a love letter. Richard Geddes was a cabin attendant on the Titanic who wrote a love letter to his wife while aboard, but unfortunately she would never go on to receive it. The letter was written on the original Titanic stationery, and it even had its original White Star Line envelope when it was found. While this story in itself is of course extremely sad, and again one of those reminders of the human side of those who were in this incident, this letter also contained something else beside utterings and confessions of love. It also featured a description that Richard wrote for his wife of a near collision that the Titanic had with the SS City of New York, obviously prior to the terrible iceberg incident. There were people who had witnessed this near collision and believed that it was a bad omen for the Titanic. In our number 7 spot today, we have a pocket watch. Okay, this artifact most certainly isn't the scariest one on today's list, but the story behind who it belonged to is one for the books. Sinai Cantor was 34 years old when he was a passenger on the Titanic. On board with him was his wife Miriam, and the pair were from Russia. They purchased second-class passenger tickets, which at the time cost them £26, which is about $3,666 in today's money. When tragedy struck and the Titanic was sinking, Sinai immediately thought of his wife. He was able to get her aboard one of the life rafts thankfully, and as far as I know, she was rescued from the icy waters. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for him, however, as he ended up being one of those who passed away in the sinking of the ship. During rescue efforts, this pocket watch ended up being recovered from his body. In our number 6 spot today, we have the inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. What could possibly be worrisome about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic. For some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. You can see that the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and could have warned her. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Titanic radio. Okay, don't yell at me. This is a piece of the ship that has not yet been recovered, but it's the focus of much debate on whether or not it should be retrieved from the wreckage. Known in 1912 as the Marconi wireless telegraph machine, the radio on the Titanic sent distress calls to nearby ships that ended up saving the lives of 700 people in lifeboats. Despite how many people died in the Titanic tragedy, many of their bodies have never been recovered, which is why there were debates about whether or not to retrieve the artifact because of the fact that there might still be remains located in the same area as the radio is. Lawyers have argued against the recovery of the radio because the dive plan did not include the prospect of there being human remains located down there. It also was argued because in order to retrieve it, they would need to cut into the ship's radio compartment, which was strongly opposed by preservation advocates. As of right now, it appears as though the dive to retrieve the radio will still occur, but it isn't exactly clear when. This radio would be a very valuable artifact, but it also would hold an eerie eerie tale of exactly when and how the radio was used during the final moments of the Titanic. In our number 4 spot today we have the telegraph. Separate from the radio we just talked about, the ship's telegraph machine was recovered in 1987, and this was used to relay commands to the engine room. So it was used as a communication device on board rather than to communicate with other ships. This telegraph machine is likely the one that was used to communicate to turn away from the iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, these commands came way too late as the ship struck the iceberg only 37 seconds after it was finally seen, and we all know what happened next. This telegraph was actually part of a Titanic auction that featured over 5,000 recovered artifacts that were selling for a combined some $200 million. In our number 3 spot today we have the bell. The bell from the crow's nest of the Titanic was recovered from the wreckage and returned to land, where it now resides in the Titanic Museum. The eerie story behind this bell is that it would have been the one that was rung 3 times by the lookout, Frederick Fleet, in order to attempt to warn of the iceberg that was ahead. Frederick, as well as the other lookout who was with him, Reginald Lee, both ended up thankfully surviving the incident and went on to later explain what happened from their point of view. They explained that if they had been given binoculars to assist with their job, they could have seen the iceberg sooner. When asked how much sooner, Frederick replied, "Well, enough to get out of the way." In our number 2 spot today we have the big piece. This was a 15-ton section of the Titanic that ended up being recovered from the ocean floor. The wreckage of the Titanic was not found until 1985 when oceanographer Robert Ballard was doing a secret underwater expedition. The big piece is about 26 by 12 feet and it was once a section of the ship's starboard side hull. This piece also has a part of the original support beam that attached this piece to the frame of the ship. It is said that where this piece was located on the ship, basically everything else around it was absolutely obliterated when the ship split in two. This artifact is said to be the reminder of the most violent aspect of the sinking of the ship, which is a horrifying thought. It was found among many other smaller pieces of the ship that had all been broken up. In our number 1 spot today we have this cherub statue. In the remnants of the Titanic, they recovered a broken cherub statue that once found its home on the grand staircase of the Titanic. Aside from cherubs just being kind of creepy in general, there's something exceptionally eerie about this piece of religious iconography being at the center of such a huge disaster, as well as being found among the wreckage years later. Cherubs are usually known as bearers of the throne or creatures who attend to God, so it's just a little creepy to have one at the scene of a terrible disaster, as well as it making through all of the years and years that the Titanic was underwater waiting to be found.
At number 10 we have the Fermi paradox. This theory has some holes, but it is still very interesting, so it was a perfect way to start out this list. We live in a universe that spans an unfathomable distance and has so many planets in them you couldn't count them even if you were really good at counting. So some of them are much older than ours, so that means that their life would be way more advanced. So why on earth have we never heard of any of these aliens? Why have they not come out of the stars to see us? Well, this could be because we have a government that is hiding them from us, or it could be because we are in a simulated world and there's no benefit to simulating life on other planets. That could mean that the processing power and whatever we're hooked up to just isn't strong enough. We need to get a rig that is way better if we want some alien life to come in. We've got to invest in a new graphics card and stuff.
Number 9. Abandoned sites. It's not uncommon to find abandoned campsites in the woods, but these rangers share their stories of the unique, strange, and scary things they found that made them stand out. The first was an abandoned house with a small shed hidden behind it. The shed had a large steel door which had been broken off its hinges when they found it. The windows had been boarded over and covered up, but venturing inside, they found only a queen-sized bed covered with burned sheets. The next was an abandoned tent found very close to the walking trail. Inside was a large stash of food like beans and rice, a sleeping bag, and a lonely teddy bear. Sometimes the stories with the least information and answers are scariest, as they allow our minds to wander and imagine various frightening scenarios. Number 8. Search returns strange evidence. A ranger and their coworker were called to head out and search for a group of teen hikers that had become separated from their group. They spent most of their day heading in the direction of where the teenagers had last been seen. Eventually, deep into the woods and their journey, they came across a startling discovery. They found branches which had been carved into spears placed into the ground, unidentifiable carvings in trees, children's stuffed toys hanging from ropes tied to the trees. One thing they noticed was that the symbols in the trees appeared to be freshly carved. As would be expected, the two were spooked, but settled down nearby as night was coming and they had to sleep. In the morning, they discovered shoe prints and a piece of fabric that had become caught on a tree. Someone had been there in the night. The teens were later discovered and the two workers returned back to base, never knowing who had been in the woods with them that night. Number 7, strange creature. A camp counselor in New York made a scary discovery when he was sneaking out late at night to meet up with his girlfriend. It was about 1 a.m. when he heard rustling in the woods next to him, expecting to be faced with something like a bear, deer, or other wild animal. Unexpectedly, a creature burst forth from the bushes towards him. In the darkness, he described the creature's appearance as being 3 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, and having 2 arms, looking like a miniature person. While it can be easy to misidentify animals in the dark of night, I personally can't think of any normal forest creature that would match anything close to this description. He then moved towards it and it apparently got scared, running away in a strange manner that the camp counselor described as being similar to doing the robot dance. To this day, he has no idea what the creature might have been. Number 6, light on the cliff. An unfortunate part of being a park ranger is having to go on search and rescue missions for missing people, and never knowing what state you might find them in, if at all. One park ranger recounts a story of him and his coworker on one of these calls, searching for a man in his 20s who had gone missing. As they spent the day searching with no luck, they decided to set up a camp and rest for the night. At about 2 a.m., he got up to go to the bathroom when he spotted a bright light moving on a cliff a few miles away, saying it looked to be like a flashlight beam. In the morning, they went to search that area and unfortunately found the missing man's body at the base of the cliff. What caught the ranger's attention was a flashlight, similar to the one he thought he had seen on the cliff. So it seems to make sense. The man had been walking with his flashlight and had unfortunately fallen. But it doesn't end there. When the coroner arrived to inspect the body, it was determined the man had clearly been dead for over 48 hours. So how could it have been him shining his flashlight on the cliff the night before? Apparently, another search and rescue team member had been near the area and hadn't seen any other people. To this day, there seems to be no explanation for what that light was. Number 5, burned mannequins. Another park ranger on Reddit shared his experience while working at a national wildlife refuge that had formerly been home to a US Army lab site. The site had been completely transformed to become a wildlife refuge, with years of thorough cleanup needing to be done on things like barbed wire fences and barricades before it could be opened. One night, when the ranger was walking deep into the forest, he saw figures in the distance. This caught him off guard, as you're not permitted to leave the trails at all. So who was out there? The ranger announced himself and moved closer, and what he discovered was 6 mannequins in military uniforms, which appeared to have been badly burnt. 6 burned figures standing around in the woods in the dark of night would have been scary for anyone to stumble upon, though apparently he chalked it up to having been part of a fabric test. Still pretty scary to discover though, and to think it was somehow missed in the decade-long cleanup of the park. Number 4, only resident. A park ranger for a small island was the only year-round resident of the area. The island had no bridges or ferries and could only be accessed by private boats. The island would be crowded in the summer, but in the off-season, the island was only inhabited by the ranger. Walking at night, he was adventuring around the island, seeing if he could hike the entire distance. He saw a flash of white in the distance, thinking it was a herd of the brown and white deer which were local to the area. He pressed forward, before hearing something move again. Suddenly, out of the woods came a 6-foot-tall man wearing a bright white shirt. He sprinted straight up to the ranger with a strange grin on his face before shouting and laughing loudly, quickly sprinting back into the woods again. The ranger was rightfully terrified because, as far as he knew, he was the only person on the small island. For the next few days, he tried to find any evidence of another person living on the island, but never found any campsite, boats, or other signs of life. Number 3, mysterious stranger. A ranger was leading a hiking trip to the top of a mountain in North Carolina, a difficult hike far from any civilization. When they reached the peak, they set up a camp on a beautiful clear night. Since it was so nice out, after the group had gone to bed in their tents, the ranger chose to sleep outside in a hammock, reading a book to pass the time. Due to the brightness of the camp and the moon, it was easy for them to see around the camp and the trail that they had taken to get there. They were soon caught off guard by the sight of something moving, expecting it to be a bear. But as they got closer, they realized it was the shape of a person. They found it odd to see someone at the top of the difficult and long trail at night with no light or any sign of gear. They watched the person move closer towards the camp before the figure stopped, staring out at the camp. The figure stood there for a while before moving to sit under a tree, still staring intently. The ranger watched the man sit there for what was apparently a few hours, before the figure got up and made his way back down to the trail. This left the poor ranger with a paranoid feeling of being followed for the remainder of the trip. Number 2. Deer head. It's not uncommon to find animals or animal remains in the woods, circle of life and all that. But a Yellowstone ranger described their very bizarre experience which occurred near a valley deep into the park. While walking a trail, they found in the middle of the path the head of a deer. What was strange was that the head was perfectly clean, no sign of blood and no sign of an animal having tried to eat it. The ranger didn't find any other signs of other animals that may have been around the area and done this. They also had no explanation for why a human may have done this, as it was a doe with no antlers that a hunter may want to collect. The experience left the ranger shaking and desperately trying to come up with an explanation for the bizarre and shocking discovery, but none could be found. Number 1. Skin changer. One wildland firefighter shares a story that his supervisor had told him many times. Apparently, in Idaho, the crew had been working on a large fire incident and would have to be there through the night in order to deal with it. The supervisor went out on an ATV to get a look at the nearby area, when a large cat, seemingly a bobcat, ran out into the road. The animal stood there and stared at him for a while, before letting out a loud scream and running up a tree nearby the road. While startling, it didn't appear to be any reason for concern. Further down the road, he discovered an abandoned cabin. This was also strange as the land was federal property and there should be no buildings. The house appeared derelict and was boarded up, everything inside appearing incredibly out of order. Unsettled, the supervisor got back on his ATV to head back, but at the exact same place where he had seen the bobcat, a woman stood in the road with a nightgown and bare feet. He asked if she needed help, to which she responded with a scream, before running up the same tree the bobcat had, faster than any human would be able to. After returning, he asked locals about the cabin in the area, recounting his experience, to which they told him that he had likely had an encounter with a skin changer.
In our number 10 spot today we have musical instruments. 2 parts of a destroyed clarinet as well as a violin that was played by bandmaster Wallace Hartley were found among the wreckage of the Titanic. I know musical instruments aren't exactly a terrifying discovery, but the discovery reminds us of the heartbreaking story of the Titanic's band. As the Titanic sank, it is famously known that the band played on despite the absolutely horrific incident that was taking place around them. At first it was widely believed that they did this because they were ordered to, and for the record, if this were the case, that still would have been insanely brave of them. But as it turns out, this is far from true. The band members were in fact not ship employees, which means that they had the same rights as any passengers to leave. So why didn't they? Well, it is now widely believed that it most likely was so that they could use their music to help calm people so that they wouldn't panic. That's some major bravery right there.
At number 9 we have the Mandela effect. You might have heard of this. This is where people misremember something from the past. Now people misremembering things happens all the time. What's the big deal? But the Mandela effect is literally thousands of people remembering it a different way. It's called the Mandela effect because there are thousands of people, maybe even millions, who remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 80s. But he didn't die in the 80s. This dude lived until he was an old man. Or am I remembering it wrong? Are the other people right? The reason why this could be proof of a simulation is because these slight mistakes could show some sort of human error or a glitch in the system on the side of the people who are running the simulation. Someone sat down on the wrong button and was like, oh, I killed Nelson Mandela. I'm gonna get written up for this for sure. God damn, that wasn't supposed to happen. At number 8 we have deja vu. If you haven't seen The Matrix, then what are you doing with your life? It's not only one of the most amazing movies that showcases what could happen if AI gets out of control, but it also is one of the greatest action movies of all time. And there's a 4th one coming, so you need to catch up on everything. Now, The Matrix was one of the first movies to showcase the simulation idea, and evidence of The Matrix or something changing in The Matrix was deja vu. If you saw something repeat itself, it meant that you were in the simulation and that things were about to get get crazy. Now, how does this translate to the real world? What if the Matrix wasn't so much a movie, but it was a message? What if the people outside of the simulation wanted us to figure it out? And see if any people would use the hints laid throughout the movie as a way to actually break free from this digital prison. There could be clues throughout that movie that showcase all the signs of us being in a world of ones and zeros. Either that, I'm starting to look like Charlie from It Was Always Sunny with the strings and paper, and I'm like, eh. At number 7, we have simulation loop. We are already starting to see what is called a simulation loop. We live in a simulated society. Many things we create are larger versions of smaller things. Planes are simulations of birds. Tanks are simulations of beetles. As we create what we think is better versions of what already exists. Now we could be getting close to a loop of creating a world which is more interesting than our own. Virtual reality has started to take the world by storm, and in it we will build worlds that are far more superior to our own. Worlds where people can fly, everyone is rich, you don't get sick, and everyone can res their buddy because they got the ray gun. Now, some people theorize that we have done this before and we are currently living in a previously created simulation, and we might be headed into another loop in the near future and go into a simulation again. So it's like simulation on simulation. Inception. In simulation. No, I'm not gonna work on that. I made that word up. I'm sorry. At number 6, we have the double slit experiment. This was an experiment where you take a panel of copper plate with 2 slits in it and then you fire electrons at it to see how the electrons interact on the other side. Do they move through in waves or particles? The first time this experiment was performed, the electrons seemed as though they were moving through in particles. The scientists wanted to see this in action, so they set up a device to observe this. And when the electrons were under observation, they moved in waves. So they did the test again without the observation, and they went back to particles, meaning that the electrons would change how they interacted based on whether or not they were being observed. If this was a simulation, much like a video game, the processing power would increase on certain areas when you were looking at them, which would explain how this changed the electron activity. Obviously, it's probably a lot smarter explanation than that, but I'm going with the simulation one because I am not smart. At number 5, we have Elon Musk said so. Come on, you can't argue with this dude. He's one of the smartest, richest people around. If anyone knew we were in a simulation, it would be this guy. He probably sees the Matrix all the time. He just doesn't want to freak us out by letting us know that there is a 100% chance we are in a simulation, by letting us know that there's a 100% chance we are in a simulation. Also, if anyone was on the up and up on whether or not we are in a simulation, it would be billionaires. Not because they paid someone to figure it out, but because they clearly have cracked some sort of code and know how the world works and are doing something we don't understand. If you had that kind of knowledge, you would be able to get ahead in the game. But Elon has made the theory of a simulation world so popular, so is he our digital messiah, or is he just a little bit crazy and has a lot of money? At number 4, we have That's Why We Have Ghosts. Now this seems like I'm trying to explain a myth with a crazy explanation, but that is why you guys come here. We want to get a little crazy with our theories because that is way more fun. Just walking around in our own reality, we don't want to do that, jeez. But what if ghosts and hauntings have nothing to do with ghosts, but they are glitchy parts of our own reality? Like a haunted house is just basically Fallout 76. Ghosts are floating around doing the T-pose, freaking everyone out. Demons, werewolves, all that sort of spooky stuff that we've always heard about, myths, monsters, and creatures that could all kill us, that's just DLC that the public didn't like and then they just patched it out. And number 3, we have creative purpose theory. Why do we exist? Some people think it's to serve God, other people think it's just to have fun, other people think there is no purpose at all, that we just live and die to get farted out into the earth and never heard from again. But what if we had a much greater purpose? To create, to make something so smart and so interesting we couldn't bear to compete with it. As we get closer and closer to making AI, it seems that a self-aware, learning, adapting intelligence that has the power of the internet in its mind would be too much for us to compete with. It would be a living God that we made, and we should be pretty proud of ourselves for doing it. But what if that is our purpose? To make a being that is all-knowing and able to move through the universe, consume knowledge, and become even more powerful, all without needing to eat, sleep, procreate, or even take breaks. What if we already did this and now we're living inside this endless machine, and the only reason it keeps us alive in this falsified world is because it wants to keep learning from us? Well, if that's the case, download me some abs because it's almost beach season. At number 2, we have computer viruses for people. DNA is a type of code, much like the code that makes up computers. So could a virus from a computer get into someone's DNA somehow? Most of you probably think that is impossible, but there was a group at the University of Washington who might prove you wrong. Now, I want to start off by saying you can't get sick from a computer. The virus that got put into human DNA cannot affect people. Don't freak out. But in 2017, this group found out that you could put malware into a strand of DNA. It was a very interesting experiment, and it might have worked because all of our DNA is actually code, and we are actually made up of ones and zeros and nothing's real. Go rob someone. Don't actually do that. And for our number 1 spot, we have the Fibonacci sequence. This is gonna be some math stuff, so if you guys aren't good at math, don't worry, because I suck at math too, and I had to find a dumbed down explanation so I could understand it, and I'm gonna be bringing you an even dumber version right out of my mouth. The Fibonacci sequence is a series of numbers where the totals equal the numbers before added together. So starting with 0, we have 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, and so on and so forth, with the sequence looking like 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and it goes on like that forever. Now, what does this have to do with simulation? Well, this sequence shows up in a lot of math and also a lot of nature. Many plants and other natural forming things have perfect Fibonacci sequences inside of them, almost like they were programmed from a computer. This could just be the most efficient way to make life and cells are living math, or could we all be in an auto-create version of life and that's how the world is built in a computer and it's just like boop, they hit a button and it makes everything.